On a dust-veiled suburban road under the pale light of morning, a man named Dylan walks beside Riggs. The legendary German shepherd whose past bleeds quietly into each paw step. Once a hero, now scarred and silent, Riggs carries the weight of a night no one dares recount. But when a child's backpack appears in the underbrush, something shifts. A scent. A signal. And Riggs begins to lead, not toward the past, but into a forest thick with secrets and the faint flickering glow of a red flashlight. What did Riggs sense? And who is still waiting in the dark? Stay till the end. This story will stay with you. The suburban road stretched out under a pale light dusted with a thin veil of ash-like dust. The breeze stirred the trees along the roadside, their leaves whispering like voices carried from the past. Dylan walked slowly across the cracked stone pavement, his eyes brushing over shuttered windows of lonely houses. Beside him, Riggs moved with steady, measured strides. Each paw fall calm, yet weighted with something uneven beneath the surface. His thick coat streaked in amber gold and deep black ruffled in the morning wind. Those sharp eyes still held their edge, but lacked the fierce brilliance of their earliest days. Dylan noticed the dog's breath sometimes faltered, a faint catch in his chest, and the front left paw lifted almost imperceptibly before touching down again. Dylan's voice came quiet, more a confession than a question. "Does it ache again?" Riggs gave no answer. He only walked on, ears pricked forward, gaze fixed far ahead, as though chasing something that had slipped away long ago. It had been months since Dylan was assigned to work with Riggs, the legendary German shepherd who once commanded the respect of seasoned officers. Their pairing had not begun gently. Dylan's predecessor, Lieutenant Mason, was gone. That night at the Riverside warehouse still haunted every retelling. Riggs had rushed in first, Mason on his heels, gunfire cracking through the dark. The hostage lived. Mason did not. Riggs had clawed at the earth, howling through the blood-soaked night, and lay beside Mason until dawn. From that day, he had ceased reacting to sirens, ignored the leash as a cue for play, and ate only when hunger left him no choice. Dylan knew the story before they ever met. He never asked, never pressed. He read the report in silence and studied the dog's eyes instead. They weren't cold. They weren't savage. They were the eyes of a survivor carrying both debt and blame. This was their 12th patrol together. Dylan didn't count by calendar days, but by rare victories, the moments Riggs turned to meet his gaze, the hesitant times he allowed Dylan's hand to rest at his neck after a shift. Every touch held a quiet trial, as if Riggs measured whether this new partner was worthy of walking on. They passed a row of houses near the tree-lined iron gates, half-closed, rusted cars, abandoned as though refusing to run again. Riggs paused at a bush nose, twitching before moving on. Nothing obvious. Yet Dylan caught the faint crease on the dog's brow. Memory stirred by a scent in the grass. He remembered that first morning of training him, fumbling with the leash while Riggs sat staring off into distance. A trainer had told him Riggs doesn't need control. He needs patience, someone willing to walk beside him. From then on, Dylan spoke less. The sun climbed, casting long twin shadows across the road. Dylan raised his water bottle toward Riggs. The dog approached his left paw, set down carefully, and drank in slow, measured gulps. Under the light, a pale scar across his shoulder glistened, a fragment from an explosion years past. "We're doing fine," Riggs Dylan murmured, a reassurance meant for them both. Riggs lifted his head. His amber eyes met Dylan's directly, unflinching. A brief exchange, heavy with judgment, forgiveness, and the faint spark of trust trying to take root. Then a sound broke the stillness, something dropping into the brush. Riggs froze, ears high. Dylan halted too. No signal passed between them, but both moved closer, in steps silent, as if drilled by years together. Riggs sniffed, muscles tightening. Dylan tightened the lead. Their eyes landed on the same spot, the glint of fabric beneath the grass. A backpack, mud-stained, its zipper streaked with dried red. Riggs snorted sharply, breathing shifted. Dylan's chest constricted. His pulse quickened. For the first time, Riggs turned back, locking eyes with Dylan before surging into the forest path. That look was both familiar and urgent, carrying one clear command: come. Rain began to fall, each drop striking the earth with a cleansing weight, soaking into the cracks as though to wash away buried sins. Dylan raised his collar and pressed forward, keeping pace with the four-legged guide slicing through the brush with silent certainty. Riggs's strides had purpose now. Not a search, but a pursuit. The canopy thickened, the smell of damp soil and moss pressing into every breath. Riggs stopped suddenly at a low clearing, muzzle pressed against the ground. Dylan knelt beside him, eyes catching the edge of darkened cloth peeking beneath dead leaves. A child's backpack, dull yellow, decorated with a faded cartoon cat. The zipper split wide, one strap torn as if yanked too hard. Rain soaked into the fabric until it looked as though dredged from memory itself. Dylan lifted the flap. A foul copper tang rose instantly. Blood. Old but unmistakable. It stained the lining and seeped into a scrap of green cloth. His hand trembled as he moved it aside. Beneath lay a small red flashlight, cheap plastic with a toy keychain. Suddenly it flickered, 3 weak bursts like a fading breath. That glow lit the inside of the pack, revealing a crumpled scrap of paper stuck to the fabric. He pulled it free, the pencil strokes faint and frantic. I'm here. 4 words. His fist tightened, instinctive, as though clutching a scream that had been smothered. Riggs lifted one paw onto the bag, eyes fixed on the flickering light, then the note, as if he understood. He sniffed hard, circling with restless intent. Dylan sealed the evidence quickly, rose and followed. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the canopy as they moved together. No commands, no hesitation. Riggs led, Dylan matched. They crossed an old trench, skirted a lightning-scarred stump, and slipped into a narrow, hidden trail, the kind only the forest kept secret, leading south into the depths of Ravenbrook pines. A snapped branch blocked the way. Riggs vaulted over, then froze on the far side, nose lifted. He glanced back at Dylan, sending a silent warning. There, dangling from a twig, was a child's scarf. Pink, small, threadbare, rain-soaked. So easy to miss. Riggs approached, sniffed, then licked the fabric gently, as though offering comfort across distance. Dylan lifted the scarf and folded it carefully. The pieces were lining up. Backpack, flashlight, note scarf. They weren't random. They were markers strung together like a breadcrumb trail. A child sharp enough to leave signs behind. And Riggs, keen beyond the reach of any ordinary sense, had caught on before Dylan even could. They pressed forward. Minutes later, Riggs halted at a fallen tree. He glanced back at Dylan, then descended a small slope into an unfamiliar clearing where muddy footprints still marked the earth. Dylan crouched. Small footprints. A child's. Uneven stumbling as if running and falling at once. Next to them a drag mark, as though something heavy had been pulled along. The soil was torn up in places, mixed with narrow tire ruts. Riggs sniffed again, his body stiff, a low bark slipping from his chest. The rain had eased, but the earth was slick and soft. Dylan noticed the trail bending toward a nearly hidden path, screened by low branches. A path someone had tried to conceal. He tightened his grip on the lead. Riggs surged forward, pace no longer steady, but urgent, nose pressed near the ground, eyes unblinking. Ahead, pale light filtered through dense branches. Riggs stopped abruptly, body taut as wire. Dylan took one step forward, then froze. There in a clearing stood a weathered wooden house swallowed by moss and tangled vines. The door sagged half shut. One window pane had shattered shards of glass scattered across damp cement. Riggs never turned his head. His gaze locked on the sliver of darkness beyond the door, as though certain of what waited inside. Dylan's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone might still be in there, alive. Riggs padded up to the step, paused, and looked back, amber eyes flashing like an invitation. The trees thinned as they entered the damp hollow. The wooden house crouched like a buried memory. Vines gripped the walls, moss mottled the tiles, and a broken swing lay collapsed by the window, creaking faintly with each gust of wind. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Riggs stood still at the threshold, head lowered slightly. Ears, pricked shoulders, tight. Dylan held his own breath. He had learned long ago that when Riggs grew this still, it meant something unnatural lingered ahead. Not the chaos of gunfire, but the deeper alarm that prickled every hair on the body. He pushed the door gently. It groaned heavy with age, revealing a room thick with dust. Light poured through the broken window, scattering into fractured beams across cracked tiles. A scarred wooden table sat in the center, surrounded by tilted frames whose faces had long since faded to nothing. Riggs entered first, slow, deliberate nose sweeping, low eyes scanning every shadow. Dylan followed his hand, brushing the flashlight clipped to his side. Silence pressed in, broken only by the scuff of his boots and Riggs's steady breathing inside a house abandoned by time. At the far end of the room was a low wooden door, blending almost seamlessly with the wall. Riggs stopped, sniffed, tilting his head as if catching sounds too faint for human ears. Then his eyes sharpened. A whimper. Dylan heard it too this time, fragile, fractured, like it rose from the bottom of a well. A plea caught in silence. He stepped closer, gripped the handle, and pulled. Behind it, a narrow staircase fell into darkness. No light, only damp earth and a chill that clawed the skin. Riggs descended first, every paw, deliberate body drawn tight like a bow. Dylan switched on his flashlight, the beam slicing across rotted steps. The walls bore smears of dirt claw marks, small and desperate. At the bottom, the space widened into a low cellar concrete ceiling, flaking mold staining the walls. To the left stood a line of iron doors. Storage rooms or cages. Riggs veered straight toward the last one. Dylan followed, breath clamped in his chest, until the light struck a tiny hand gripping the bars. A boy. Hair-matted eyes wide with fear. He recoiled from the light, shrinking back. Riggs lowered himself at the door, laying his head across his paws. No sudden moves. Just stillness, a wordless promise, safe now. The child stilled. His eyes blinked, then he edged forward to the bars. Riggs eased closer, touched his muzzle to the boy's hand, and licked gently. A sigh escaped the child. No sob, no cry, just a fragile breath that wasn't broken anymore. Dylan unlatched the lock. The boy didn't run, didn't scream. He stepped out slowly, one hand resting against Riggs's neck, as though that soft fur was the only anchor holding him steady. "What's your name?" Dylan asked quietly. The boy shook his head. Whether memory or fear had stolen his voice, Dylan couldn't tell. They searched the rest. 6 more children, huddled in corners, eyes hollow. Each time Riggs approached, something shifted. A girl sobbed aloud. Another reached a trembling hand to touch him. For some, his presence was the first proof that the world outside still existed. Dylan called it in. Rescue teams would arrive in 15 minutes. He turned to Riggs. The dog lay at the center of the floor, gaze fixed on the last cell where a girl with long curls clutched a worn stuffed toy. Dylan approached. The girl didn't retreat. She only extended a folded scrap of paper through the bars. He opened it, heart stalling at the words. Scrawled in uneven, childish letters, "Nora is still held. She cannot speak. She didn't escape." Dylan froze. His eyes met Riggs's. The dog was already on his feet, eyes burning with clarity. Riggs bolted, charging back up the stairs. Dylan snatched his flashlight and followed. that instant, every footprint, every whimper, every hand clinging to rusted bars seared into him. Someone was still down here, and the red light in that backpack had never flickered for nothing. The rusted lock screeched as Dylan twisted it. Old iron protested, then fell away onto the cement with a clang that echoed through the suffocating silence. Riggs surged ahead, not reckless, not wild, but unwavering, each stride carving into darkness, as though he had always known what was buried within. Dylan followed flashlight beams slicing across the narrow hall. The air thickened. Mold, urine, and fear distilled into a stench that clung to the lungs. He clenched his jaw, breathing steady, eyes darting across the half-shut doors lining the corridor. A faint rustle stirred to the left. Riggs didn't bark. He simply turned his head, ears tilting as he crept toward one of the doors. And then in that suffocating cellar air, his gaze softened. Gentle in a way so out of place, it made Dylan pause. The beam of his flashlight caught a boy curled in the corner, wide-eyed, trembling, but silent. Riggs didn't force his way in. Instead, he lowered himself against the floor, sliding forward until he lay just outside the bars. His head lifted slightly, ears angled toward the child. But the rest of his body slackened, radiating the image of something harmless, a quiet creature meant to calm. The boy stared back at him. Dirt streaked his face, dark circles shadowed his eyes. But as their eyes met, his lips trembled and parted, releasing a word that seemed locked away for far too long. Dog. Riggs raised his head, licking his lips as if to answer. Dylan unlocked the cell and stepped in slowly. The boy didn't retreat, though his gaze never strayed from Riggs. Dylan crouched, extending his open hand. "I'm a police officer. Riggs will stay with you." Yet it was Riggs's warm breath, steady and close, that finally drew the child from the shadows. Crawling inch by inch, his hand pressed against the floor, he came to the dog's side and stopped. Riggs leaned forward, resting his head gently on the boy's knees. The boy pulled a corner of his shirt across his eyes, wiping away tears, lips tight, but gaze thawing. Dylan stepped back, sweeping his flashlight toward the other cells. Whimpers rose low at first, then layered. Small hands tapped against the bars. 6 faces emerged in the beam, children between 4 and 8, thin, pale shoulders drawn tight. Some clutched toys frayed beyond repair, others hid against the walls, bracing, as if any touch might shatter them. He opened the doors one by one. Riggs stayed beside the first boy, but his eyes flicked to each child who stepped into the corridor. Strangely, there was no screaming, no wild panic, though their bodies shook, all of them, turned toward Riggs, drawn like moths to the only light in that underground dark. A short-haired girl with a torn teddy bear sat quietly at Riggs's side, leaning into him without a word, fingers combing through his fur, as though she had always known him. Another girl, a little older, knelt and looked up at Dylan. My mom. Is she here?" He crouched, placing a hand softly on her shoulder. "Someone will take you home. But first, I need to make sure you're safe." She nodded, eyes shining but dry. In the pale beam, her face seemed both fragile and far too grown-shaped by fear, yet still carrying the untouched core of a child. Dylan searched the basement carefully. At the far wall, he found signs of bricks, once sealed and then removed. Perhaps the captor's way in and out. Now, silence claimed it. He raised his radio. "I have 7 children. Send medics immediately, more lights and 2 ambulances. They've been confined for days." The confirmation crackled back. Dylan exhaled the first full breath since Riggs had stopped at the backpack. Turning, he found the sight that made his chest ache. 7 children clustered around Riggs. None directed, none told to. Some hugged their knees, some leaned against each other, all of them anchored by the German shepherd lying among them. Eyes closed, breathing slow as though standing guard, even in rest. One boy fished through his pocket and pulled out a lollipop, the wrapper torn off long ago. He held it out toward Dylan. Can the dog eat this? Dylan chuckled softly, crouching to take it. He ruffled the boy's hair. He has his own food, but I think he'd be touched by the gift. The boy nodded, then leaned close to Riggs, whispering something into his ear. Riggs opened his eyes' tail, giving a single quiet thump. The children's laughter broke out in fragile ripples, the first sound of life returning. From outside, sirens began to echo. Dylan rose, and Riggs lifted his head, glancing at him. Not in question, but in recognition. This part was done. But another part still waited. Morning settled over the makeshift medical camp by Ravenbrook Forest. The smell of antiseptic clung to the damp canvas, mingling with rain-soaked air and hushed footsteps. Dylan sat at a folding table inside the main tent, surrounded by files, sketches of the site, hurried notes. Riggs lay at his feet, head resting on the pack as though listening too. A young nurse entered carrying a tray with warm milk and a box of crayons. Sam, the first boy, asked to draw. "I thought you'd want to see." Dylan nodded, rising. Sam sat near a cot, a blank sheet before him, red crayon in hand. Silent, his head tilted, eyes fixed on some distant vision. Each stroke deliberate, weighted with memory. Dylan crouched beside him, saying nothing. He had learned from Riggs that silence could be the best bridge. Sam drew a tall fence, enclosing an old 2-story house with a black-tiled roof and a tower jutting high. The front doors were shaded in black windows, crowded a figure faint behind the curtains. What froze Dylan's breath was the small emblem drawn at the gate's peak, a circle crossed by 3 interlocked slashes filled in with red. It was the same mark, etched faintly into the pendant they had recovered yesterday, hidden in one girl's pocket when she left the basement. Sam pressed harder with the red crayon, then stopped staring at his drawing. "Nora was there," he whispered. "She taught us numbers and sang lullabies." Dylan lifted the paper carefully. Riggs came closer, eyes fixed on the emblem, as if he too recognized it. He sniffed, then looked up, amber eyes glowing. "Riggs." "What are you seeing?" Dylan murmured almost to himself. The dog stared at the mark a long while, then turned his head toward the trees outside where the morning light crept through. Dylan gripped the drawing tighter. This was no stray detail. It was the link. He returned to the table, pulling out the pendant taken from Nora. Light glinted across its worn surface, the 3 carved slashes, faint but clear. Sam approached, pointing from the pendant to the paper. At the big house, the people wore this, around their necks or marked on their arms. A child's words unguarded, but they struck like a hammer, shattering the fog, still clouding the case. Dylan pulled up his tablet, eyes scanning through maps of the region. Only one mansion stood within 30 miles of the trail's direction. A forgotten estate buried in a private forest, abandoned after a legal dispute 10 years back, now owned under the cover of a faceless real estate company. He keyed in a command, running the owner's registration through the internal database. The corporate name matched a string of characters already flagged in a human trafficking case from 2 years ago, a case that had never closed. Riggs nosed closer to the screen muzzle, brushing against the glowing outline of the mansion. It wasn't chance, Dylan knew, not instinct alone. The dog sensed something, an echo, a scent from memory, or some primal signal only his kind could recognize. He turned to Sam. "You've been inside that mansion, haven't you?" The boy nodded. "Yes, but only upstairs. The basement stairs were locked. The older boys were allowed down there. I wasn't." "Older boys?" Dylan leaned in. Sam looked around, voice dropping, his eyes growing distant. There was one. Blonde hair, pale skin scar on his arm. He said he would come back for Nora, but then he never did. Riggs lifted his head instantly. His ears sharpened, his chest rising with a deep inhale. Dylan scribbled the details. The blond young man might have been another victim, a traitor, or the one who had left the coded warnings scattered in the forest. He rose, looking at Riggs. "What do you think? Do we go after it?" Riggs didn't need to answer. He was already standing at the tent flap, posture straight, eyes fixed forward. Not cautious now. Ready. Dylan studied the drawing once more. The black roof, the iron gate, the red mark like blood. A child could not have invented that. And his four-legged partner never mistook his instincts. Evening fell fast on the road back to headquarters. Slants of orange light broke through the patrol car's windows, pooling across the wheel, like time urging them forward. In Dylan's hands lay a freshly confirmed file, Beaumont. The name echoed from old newsprint, photographs nearly 2 decades past. A man in pale suits, thin smile, always with a child at his side, during ribbon cuttings and charity galas. The papers had called him the godfather of orphanages, founder of 8 homes for abandoned children across the state. Behind those photographs lay questions no one had dared ask too loudly. Dylan laid the file down, his eyes pausing on a note scribbled by a retired investigator, Riggs alerted on Beaumont during the Evergreen case. But there was no evidence to move forward. He glanced at the dog, now curled neatly on the passenger seat, eyes closed, ears twitching with every subtle sound. Even in stillness, Riggs seemed to read the pulse of the world. Dylan drummed his fingers on the wheel. Evergreen, the case that had rattled the state. 3 children gone from a newly built home, no trace, no cameras, no suspects. Officially ruled runaways. But Riggs, then still young, had sniffed something from a scarf left behind. The report had recorded Riggs displayed abnormal alert behavior when scenting Beaumont's coat, not enough proof. His handler at the time had said flatly, "Riggs only reacts that way to blood or familiar threat." Now, years later, the same name surfaced. Not through testimony, but a child's drawing. The mansion's emblem was the same mark once hidden in the logo of Beaumont's earliest charity. The noose was tightening not with confessions, but with a shepherd's unerring nose. Riggs opened his eyes, stretching upright, gaze fixed beyond the windshield. At that moment, Dylan's phone buzzed. Intel from surveillance: Beaumont had just held a private fundraiser at a mansion on the city's edge. The mansion Sam had drawn. "We're going," Dylan muttered, keying the ignition. Riggs shifted forward toward the door, ready. By dusk, the mansion rose before them. It was the sketch brought to life: black tiles, iron gates, a tower staring like a cold sentinel. Lights glowed inside, gates sealed. 2 guards stood outside in black coats, radios at their ears. Dylan stopped the car down the road, watching. Riggs's breathing slowed beside him. But his body curved, tense pause, planted. The scent here had him bristling. It was undeniable. "Is Beaumont inside?" Dylan radioed. "No, his car left 20 minutes ago." "We don't have direction," the duty officer replied. Dylan unfolded the map marking Beaumont's appearances at past events. The points formed a crescent, the mansion at its heart, and the surrounding dots matched the sites of scattered disappearances over the past 3 years. He turned to Riggs. "You know his scent. Can you track him?" Riggs gave no sign. He simply leapt from the car, nose pressed to the earth, moving toward the forest behind the estate. Seconds later, he lifted his head, set on the northbound trail. No hesitation. Dylan followed, flashlight beam bouncing across the path as they ran. Riggs drove through the underbrush, following the layered scents of sweat, skin, and things no human could distinguish. Suddenly, he stopped at a fallen tree. Dylan crouched, pushing aside damp leaves at its roots. A wooden box emerged, sealed in plastic. Inside, files. Names, photographs, ID numbers, dates marked transfer. Dylan flipped through. His chest froze. Nora's name was there. The pieces snapped tight. Beaumont, the mansion, the orphanages, the children who never came home. Not scattered crimes. A system. Riggs growled low, nose sweeping again before lifting his head toward the north. His eyes locked as though on something just vanished into the trees. Dillon shoved the files into his pack and tightened the leash. We've got a long road ahead. A light rain began to fall, drumming against the tin roof of the command post, hastily erected in Ravenbrook's woods. Each drop beat like the throb of a warning heart. Dillon hunched over the folding table, eyes ringed with exhaustion after 2 sleepless nights. Files of the rescued children lay spread before him, every sheet a face most too young to recall full names. He traced each fragment of information, cross-checking the scrawled notes of doctors, nurses, and the halting whispers of children who had survived. Riggs lay pressed against Dillon's boots, body taut as a drawn wire. Neither fully asleep nor truly awake, just waiting silent for the call to move. Each time Dillon shifted a file, the shepherd's eyes tracked the page, as if reading alongside him. At last, in the corner of a hospital report, Dillon found a scrawled note: Nora. Lost contact after transfer, current location unknown. His brow furrowed. The confirmed victim list showed 6 girls and 4 boys. All accounted for, all safe. But Nora, her name wasn't there. Sam's drawing still rested in Dillon's pocket. Long hair, wide eyes, a mouth that seemed to stare through walls. She was real. He opened his laptop, backtracking through orphanage records. Nora's name surfaced at Maple Haven, a center funded directly by Beaumont's charity. The final entry matched the date of an internal transfer ceremony at the mansion. A ceremony. For children. Dillon clenched his fist. He turned to Riggs. "Do you remember Nora's scent?" Riggs rose at once. He circled the table, sniffing each pile of papers, then froze before a pale pink scarf. Sam had said it once belonged to Nora. The dog's eyes lit, breath-quickening chest rising deep and urgent. He stepped back, then strode straight for the tense flap, tail lowered in the posture of a guide ready to lead. Dillon said nothing. He pulled on his jacket, grabbed the forest map, and followed. The rain had thinned, leaving silvered streaks across leaves and the pungent musk of damp earth hanging thick. Riggs pressed nose to soil, tracing a path along an old trail already combed by police. But this time he didn't wander. He cut a curve, then veered sharply left into a narrow track along the cliffside, a way out of the evacuation perimeter. "You're certain?" Dillon whispered, though he already knew. Riggs's answer was to climb the ridge claws, scraping rock as he sniffed hard into the wind. His breath came quick, his whole frame taut, nose aimed toward a path leading to an abandoned lodge closed years ago after a flood. Dillon tried calling for backup, but the forest swallowed the signal. Alone, he marked trees with chalk-logged coordinates and pressed forward. The lodge loomed like a ghost among the pines. Roof caved in, windows, shattered curtains dangling like withered leaves. Debris littered the rooms, but no sign of recent habitation. Riggs didn't enter through the front. He slipped around the back through a rotted wall into what had been a kitchen. Dillon followed flashlight beam, sweeping. Dust layered the floor thick, but certain patches were smoothed as though someone had lain there or been dragged. Then he saw it, a dried arc of blood curving toward the rear door. Riggs rumbled low in his throat, steady but firm. He traced the trail out through moss and underbrush until he halted, lifting his head. The scent was faint, thinned by wind. Then abruptly, he shifted course, running along the stream's edge. Dillon kept pace, catching scraps of fabric snagged on branches, signs of someone dragged, struggling. Nearly an hour they followed the scent fading. Then Riggs stopped, ears pricked, gaze stretched into the distance. Dillon held still. A sound carried faint on the night air, an engine muffled and far. He checked his map. Route 13. A service road closed after a fatal crash 3 years back. Abandoned. except by those running. Riggs stepped back, eyes speaking plainly. "They've taken her. She's alive, and they're moving her out." Dylan's grip tightened on the leash. "Nora's still alive," he breathed. "And they're trying to erase the last trace we can follow." Later, in the cramped quiet of a makeshift outpost, the tick of a wall clock and Riggs's steady breath filled the room. Dylan lay on a stiff cot body, aching from the endless chase, mind refusing rest. On the table, the little red flashlight still blinked steady, a toy salvaged from Sam's backpack. Riggs hadn't looked away from it all evening. He hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, just watched it flicker as though deciphering its pulse. Dylan had tried switching it off once. Each time the light died, Riggs pressed his nose against it, urging him, "Don't forget." He pulled the blanket higher, slipping at last into heavy, restless dreams. Drips echoed somewhere in the dark. Cold, wet. Dylan found himself back in the basement hall. Molded walls, uneven dirt, a rusted iron door ajar. He raised his flashlight, tried to call a name, but no sound escaped. Only thick air, dense as fog. And then he saw her. Nora, sitting at the corridor's end dress white, but caked in mud, clutching the red flashlight, eyes fixed on him, not pleading, not panicked. Waiting. Waiting beyond hope. She raised her hand slowly, as though to touch something unseen. Dylan stretched his hand toward her. Just one step more. He took it. The light in her palm sputtered out. Darkness swallowed everything. A shriek split the air. Door hinges or the strangled cry of a throat silenced too long. Dylan bolted upright, sweat chilling his skin, hands clammy. The room was unchanged. The red light still blinked. Riggs was still there, but this time the shepherd's head was raised, amber eyes watching him unblinking. Dylan dragged a hand across his face. He had never dreamed so vividly. Nora's breath, her gaze the damp chill of the cellar floor. Each detail carved deep into his chest. His eyes met Riggs's. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Riggs stepped forward, nose nudging the flashlight switch. It blinked once, twice, 3 times. Then fell still as if exhausted. Dylan cradled it in his palm. Just a toy. Yet it had led them from a backpack in the woods to a hidden basement, from Riggs's instincts to Dylan's dream. And now it carried a cry that refused to fade. He opened his phone, scrolling the list of missing children. None had kin to claim them. None but Nora. Sam had said her mother once came in secret at night. A young woman in a long coat who left behind foil-wrapped cookies. Dylan returned to the drawing. At the bottom corner, the boy had added a tree, its trunk thick, its crown wide, and beside it a tall figure with one arm raised as if shielding a child, all of it drawn in red, the same color as the flashlight. He thought of a language no one taught, no one translated light. For children unheard, maybe the only way to speak was through a flicker, a silent signal across the dark. Dylan stood. "Riggs, let's go." The dog lifted his head. No second command needed. Together they stepped out into the pale fog of morning. The hills of Ravenbrook lay smothered in mist like a shroud draped across the land. Pines rose from the whiteness like sleepwalking giants, their trunks swallowed halfway in cloud. The only sounds were the wind threading through needles and the steady tread of man and dog. Dylan gripped the leash tight, eyes fixed on the narrow dirt path. Riggs moved at his side, nose sweeping low stride, measured eyes sharp. Since dawn, they had tracked the faint scent trail Riggs had uncovered after the night's rain. It led them to a place nearly erased from the maps, a half-forgotten estate called Elm Hollow Retreat, a mansion perched midway up the mountain, abandoned for years. The only way in, according to the old records, was a suspension bridge. They reached it as the fog thinned just enough to show the cables stretched across the gorge. A narrow plankway swayed in the wind chains, groaning boards warped. Some snapped, the whole span trembling above a white abyss with no visible floor. Riggs froze. Dylan did too, hand tightening on the leash. He knew why. The accident was still in the files. A rescue mission years ago had ended in collapse when the bridge failed, sending a special ops officer into the ravine. Riggs, barely 2 years old then still in training, had seen it happen. The fallen man had been his first partner. No one ordered Riggs to remember, but he never forgot. Dylan knelt, hand resting lightly on the shepherd's head. I know, but this time I'm with you. Riggs met his gaze. In those amber eyes stirred hesitation, grief, but also resolve, as if memory itself whispered that now was the moment to go on. Dylan stepped onto the bridge first. Each plank groaned beneath his weight. He tested the rhythm, careful listening. The bridge held, though every gust swung it wide. Riggs lingered, then drew a deep breath and stepped on too. The span stretched longer than it looked. Wind tore at Dylan's coat, whipped his hair cut cold against his skin. A board cracked beneath him. He shifted quickly, pressing weight to the other leg, inching forward. Riggs clung close, angled right body taut with instinct. The rush of chains, the tilt of wood, Dylan's every move kept him braced for collapse. At the center, Dylan stopped. The fog ahead parted, unveiling the silhouette of Elm Hollow. Peaked roofs, arched windows, and a black spire piercing the cloud like a horn. A fortress adrift in mist. A sudden gale slammed across the gorge. The bridge lurched. Riggs slipped, claws scrambling. Dylan lunged, seizing the leash with one hand, clutching a chain with the other. Riggs swung against the railing, paws flailing in air. But his eyes held no panic, only fierce focus. Dylan pulled muscles, straining inch by inch against the howling wind and shrieking wood. At last, Riggs scrambled back onto the boards. They collapsed together on the deck, chests heaving. Dylan stroked his backhand, still trembling. You did it, Riggs. The shepherd licked his knuckles, then rose, shaking himself, dry eyes set on the far end of the span. Neither spoke. No need. They rose and walked, and soon they stepped onto firm ground again. Dylan looked back at the bridge, that fragile tether between memory and the present. We crossed this time, Riggs. The dog stood beside him, eyes fixed on the mansion beyond. The place where secrets still lay, and a girl still waited. The world on this side of the bridge felt like one abandoned by time. Dylan moved slowly up the stone path toward Elm Hollow, his hand resting lightly on Riggs's leash. Wild roses tangled at the edges, but no leaf stirred. The air was colder than the forest behind. No flowers, no insects, no birdsong. Only silence, heavy and airless, as if the place had stopped breathing long ago. Riggs halted before the iron gate rust, climbing the bars, moss choking the fence. Yet the metal surface gleamed smooth in places, wiped, maintained. He lowered his muzzle, tracing the stones. Each sniff read layers of scent like pages of history. Dylan examined the gate. The padlock dangled as though untouched, but the dust below bore a fresh scuff. Footprints. Large, thick-soled boots, military grade. Riggs veered down a side track. Grass lay flattened in long streaks, tire marks pressed deep. He stopped at a great oak where soil had been churned up by wheels. Dylan knelt, touched the earth, still damp. Less than a day old. Someone was here, and took something away, he muttered. Riggs raised his nose, scenting ahead. Dylan followed the line of his gaze across a neglected garden. Old flower beds, framed with bricks, lay torn open. Earth clawed up. At the far end, a stone well crouched, its rim black with moss. Riggs reared onto his hind legs, pressing paws to the lip muzzle dipping low. He made no sound, only stared into the void. Dylan leaned beside him, beam cutting down the shaft. No water, Just cracked soil and a glint. A small round fragment of metal. A bullet head. He marked the spot, lifted his radio, tried to call it in. The static hissed. The forest smothered every signal. As they moved toward the front of the mansion, Riggs suddenly veered toward a corner of the wall. He gave a low bark, then looked up. Dylan raised his eyes. Just above, hidden between bricks, a tiny black speck. A concealed camera. Dylan stepped back, scanning wider, and the realization struck the entire facade was built to hide surveillance. Lenses tucked into statues' vents, even the heads of garden lamps. Someone's watching from inside, he murmured. Riggs shifted back a step, ears tilted low. Not from fear, but from listening. He cocked his head, waiting for the faintest stir behind the walls, but nothing came. Elm Hollow stood silent, polished and pristine like a coffin draped in finery. Beautiful on the outside, dead within. Dylan signaled. They moved to the main door. His hand brushed the knob, cold, unyielding. He turned. Locked. Riggs pressed his nose to the gap beneath, then padded along the wall, stopping at a narrow hatch, perhaps a woodshed entrance or basement chute. Dust lay thick, but stains of grease smeared across the ground marks of something heavy dragged through. "We'll go in there." Dylan snapped on his flashlight, crouched, pushed. The door gave too easily. It had been oiled. Darkness pooled beyond. He gestured. Riggs slipped in first, paw steps light as a shadow. Dylan followed. The basement air closed around them, dense metallic lined with the faint tang of sweat-soaked fabric. The beam cut across empty shelves, cracked brick, and halted at a bulk beneath a black tarp. Dylan pulled it back. A small freight container shipping label, still clinging. Riggs pressed close nose at a seam, ears stiff. Then his body jolted, eyes wide as though some buried scent had struck home. Dylan heard it too, a faint scratch, the sound of nails against metal. Someone was held here. He met Riggs's stare. The shepherd's whole frame leaned forward, ready. "Let's go," Dylan whispered. "She's waiting." The air in the cellar felt stretched to breaking the silence, ready to tear with the slightest sound. Dylan crept past the bare shelves, flashlight sweeping fractures in the walls. Riggs led, nose dragging the floor, body wired tight. He stopped at the far corner behind the container. A stone slab jutted unnaturally, laid rather than set. Riggs sniffed, scraped lightly. A hollow clink answered. Dylan knelt, beam close. The edges bore wear grooves of turning. He tapped. Empty beneath. A false stone. Riggs sniffed again, then sat back, yielding space. Dylan pressed down. The slab shifted, slid aside, unveiling a square shaft descending in darkness. No ladder, just a slope of timber and dark carpet, invisible without light. A draft rose cold and metallic, sweet with rust. Dylan shone down. The passage stretched narrow, like the throat of some vast beast. "We go." Riggs slipped first, no hesitation. Dylan followed. The tunnel was too tight for them to walk abreast. Each wooden step bore faint drag marks, the scuffs of something heavy pulled down. The walls were brick-lined with thick padding, soundproofing professional grade. This wasn't for storage. It was built to hide people, to keep them unseen. At a fork, Riggs paused, nose lifted, inhaling deep. Then, without doubt, he turned left, surging forward as though catching a scent he knew. The corridor ended at a gray steel door marked faintly with a painted 9. The strokes trembled as if scrawled in panic. Riggs pressed to the ground, ear at the base. He didn't bark, didn't claw. Just froze, eyes fixed under the gap. Dylan bent. A glow leaked beneath. Not the sterile white of fluorescence. Red. The same red as that toy flashlight. His hand found the handle. Locked. A magnetic seal. No simple break. Dylan withdrew a blade from his pack, eased it into the casing. Riggs stayed prone, unmoving. Seconds stretched like held breath. At last a click. The door loosened. Dylan pushed just enough for light to fall inside. Room 9 was small, half the size of a living room. Every wall lined with soundproof panels. On the floor, a thin mattress. In the corner, a shallow tray of water, a scattering of broken toys. And on the floor, one dim flashlight pulsing red. A child curled around it. Nora. Her dress smeared with dirt, hair hanging long across her face, arms locked tight around the tiny glow, as if it were her last ember of life. Her eyes half shut, breath shallow, so faint Dylan almost missed it. Until Riggs stepped close and lowered his head to touch her hand. Her eyes opened. The first look was not fear. It was shock. Then tears spilled silent, unvoiced. Riggs pressed closer, nudging the light toward her hand. Dylan knelt, voice gentle. "Your name is Nora, isn't it?" She nodded faintly, lips moving no sound. Dylan laid a hand on her shoulder, feeling the trembling beneath her skin. "I'm Dylan. This is Riggs. We're taking you out." Nora lifted a hand, slow, touching Riggs's ear as if to prove he was real. Riggs leaned in, steady, silent. Dylan scanned the walls. No cameras, a place meant to be erased, kept secret. Proof they never intended Nora to be found. As Dylan stepped back into the corridor, the door closed behind him, with a soft thud sealing the air. Riggs stayed pressed to Nora, but his head turned, ears pricked. Instinct. Footsteps. Measured, deliberate. No attempt to hide. Dylan slid his earpiece in, hand tightening on the pistol at his side, safety off. From the corner of the hall, a figure emerged. Tall, clad in a gray suit, hair slicked, chin smooth. His face neat, polished, calm to the point of cold. He stopped before Dylan, not a flicker of surprise. "Seems you've lost your way." Dylan didn't answer right away. He studied the man from head to toe, then eased back a step, putting space between them. "And you? Who are you?" The man smiled faintly, producing a lanyard with a badge. "Technical manager for Beaumont's welfare facilities. I oversee the data links and security systems. My name is Rhodes." Rhodes, a name Dylan had circled in his notes, a ghost in the files. Never charged, never arrested, his record scrubbed clean. But his shadow appeared again and again wherever children vanished. Dylan gave a slow nod, keeping his voice level. "And do you know there's a girl named Nora, locked in that soundproof room behind you?" Rhodes's smile didn't falter. Polite, civil. "Do you have a search warrant?" Dylan said nothing. His hand stayed firm on Riggs's lead. The shepherd had risen now, pressed to Dylan's flank, body taut. His nose lifted, drawing a long breath. A faint hiss left his throat, instinct clawing its way out of memory. Dylan glanced down. Riggs's eyes had darkened, pupils shrinking to hard points, ears thrust forward, muzzle trembling. Dylan knew that sign. Riggs had caught the scent of blood, not adult, something lighter, sharper, the scent of fear, of children's blood. Rhodes regarded the dog like a faulty machine. "Your animal seems agitated. They often overreact to strangers in the dark." Dylan didn't reply. He watched Rhodes's hand dip into his jacket pocket, not drawing anything, just a reflex. But the motion made Dylan tighten his grip on the lead. Riggs tilted his head, released a short rasp. Not a bark. A sound dragged out of memory. Rhodes's tone softened, almost soothing. "You have no warrant, no evidence, no authority to detain me. Push any further and you become the intruder." Dylan drew a breath. He knew Rhodes wasn't wrong. Without an order or hard proof, a misstep could collapse everything. Nora could be erased into the system as just another runaway. He shifted back half a step. "Then go," he said quietly, never breaking eye contact. Rhodes inclined his head, smiling as if it were a business courtesy, and stepped past. He moved close to Riggs, pausing briefly. "We meet again, little friend." Riggs's chest rumbled, a low growl threading from deep inside. Dylan steadied him with a hand at the collar. The shepherd didn't lunge, didn't move. He only glared, holding Rhodes's retreating shadow until the man dissolved into the corridor, the automated lights dying behind him one by one, until nothing remained but dark. Dylan crouched, hand brushing Riggs's back. "You remember that scent, don't you?" Riggs didn't stir. But his eyes, the same burning eyes Dylan had seen at an old crime scene, gleamed again. Not rage. A wound reopened, raw years buried. Dylan jotted notes, name, time, location. He knew Rhodes would erase every trace by now. But Riggs wouldn't. And one day, that scent would lead them back. Not to cross paths again, but to end it. The Ravenbrook station was quiet at night, but in surveillance room 3, the glow of monitors painted Dylan's drawn face. He sat hunched at the consoles, watching footage crawl frame by frame, blurred and disjointed like watered-down blood. Riggs lay at his boots, head on Dylan's shin ears, twitching. Since leaving Elm Hollow, he hadn't slept deeply once. Even during the vet's checks, his eyes had stayed fixed on the ceiling, as if waiting for a sound he knew too well. Dylan replayed the drone feed for the 3rd time, the final seconds before the signal cut. He froze, zoomed. The 3rd floor emerged through the fog, arched windows, stone trim. And there, a flicker in the corner pane, small, red. He enhanced, adjusted contrast. Not a flare, not glare, a rhythm. 3 short flashes, 1 long, then 3 again. Dylan's breath caught. Morse code. Riggs's head lifted at his voice. Then suddenly the shepherd surged up, a growl leaking out, backing toward the door as if to pull Dylan with him. "You saw it too," Dylan whispered. Riggs barked, sharp, loud, the first since they'd left room 9. Heads turned in the station, but Dylan only nodded. Confirmation. His silent partner had spoken. He pressed the comm button. "Mobilize the response unit. We're going back to Elm Hollow. Someone's still inside." Mist fell over the old estate like a veil of glassy rain. The tactical team fanned across the perimeter, but Dylan and Riggs went straight for the side hatch. Riggs led the way, not sniffing, not searching. This time scent didn't guide him. Light did, and it was calling. Dylan raised his beam toward the 3rd floor. Nothing but shadows in the windows. They slipped inside. The stairwell groaned under Dylan's boots, each plank ready to splinter. Riggs bounded ahead, silent, pausing only at corners, then racing on. They reached the last door in the hall. Dylan touched the handle. Cold. Always cold. He turned it. The room lay bare. White walls, low ceiling, a small table by the window. Upon it, a red flashlight. Child's toy peeling sticker of a giraffe, blinking in the same rhythm. Riggs approached, not sniffing, not testing. He sat, gaze fixed beyond the window where the streetlight shimmered faint on glass. Dylan lifted the flashlight. At the base, a message scrawled in marker, "I am still here." His heart stilled. Not despair, not a cry for help, a declaration. Riggs jerked upright, nose pressed to the far wall. He scraped at a seam with his paw. Dylan tapped. Hollow, false wall. He called the team Pride with a crowbar. Each strike rang like a heartbeat. Dust rose, paint cracked. Riggs held fast, eyes fixed, unwavering. 10 minutes, and a breach opened. Behind it, stairs, wooden narrow plunging into a floor never drawn on any map. Dylan met Riggs's stare. "Let's go." Riggs slipped down first, no leash needed. Dylan followed. Air pushed back at them, cold, metallic, stale with rot. The stairs sagged, cramped, barely wide enough for a man bent low. Riggs's silhouette darted through the light, a gray wraith swallowed by black. No sound followed, not even breathing. Dylan gripped his flashlight tighter, every muscle stretched like a wire ready to snap. At the bottom of the stairs stretched a short corridor walls lined with raw steel, a design entirely different from the rest of the mansion. This wasn't a place meant to hide someone. This was a place built to confine. Riggs halted before a thick steel door beside it, an old control panel, its buttons dust-caked. Dylan's beam swept across the handle, there a smear of blood still fresh. From behind the door, a sound scraped out something being dragged across the floor. He pressed his ear close. Nora. Silence. Then, a sob, faint. "It's you, isn't it?" Dylan's voice cracked. "I'm Dylan. Riggs is here." The sob turned into muffled crying. Riggs pressed his nose under the door's edge, whining low. Dylan seized the handle, yanked hard, but it didn't budge. He pulled back, eyes darting over the panel. Manual override possible, if he could strip the lock. He crouched, jammed a blade under the casing. That's when a sharp clack echoed above. The corridor trembled. A red light flickered to life overhead, stuttering like a dying pulse. Emergency lockdown. Dylan's eyes shot up. No. The auto-seal heavy gears whirred, the deep groan of machinery awakening, the door's mechanism priming to shut, permanently. He stabbed a screwdriver into the lock, twisting with all his weight. Screeching metal, but the casing held. Nearby lay a long iron bar. He seized it, wedged it in, heaving with desperate force. Sweat poured down his face. "Riggs!" back he shouted. But Riggs didn't move. He stayed by the door, nostrils flaring, growling softly, eyes fixed on the crying child beyond. The steel door shuddered, beginning to descend. A thin line of light appeared, then shrank. Dylan strained on the bar, every tendon burning, but the hinge only rattled. The auto-seal was nearly complete. Half the doorway was gone, iron jaws devouring the gap. And then, Riggs turned his head back, a single instant, like a nod, and he lunged through the gap. Riggs Dylan screamed. He flung himself forward, iron bar tearing his arm as he reached. But Riggs had already slipped through his body, just slim enough. In the flashlight's strobe, Dylan caught a glimpse. Nora, tangled hair, tear-swollen eyes. Riggs gripping her sleeve, pulling her from the corner. A deep, defiant snarl echoed. The ground shook. The door slammed shut. Silence. Dylan collapsed, arm bleeding, chest, heaving eyes locked on the sealed barrier. Seconds ticked. Then, a faint scraping inside. He pressed his ear close, hardly breathing. A claw scratching. Then a whisper, frail as wind. "Riggs." A click. At the base of the door, an emergency hatch popped open. And from it, a tiny hand reached out. Dylan grasped it, pulling gently, firmly. Nora tumbled into his arms, streaked with dust and iron clothes, torn, eyes wide with shock. Yet she clutched the red flashlight tight. He held her close. "You're safe now." Nora shook, tears streaming. Her voice broke against his chest. "He's still inside." Dylan's gaze clung to the door. Nothing, only dust in the air. Riggs, the steadfast partner, had chosen to stay behind to shield a child from the jaws of iron. And now, he was gone. But Dylan knew. He was alive. On the other side of the dark, carrying an unspoken vow. On the muddy grass before Elm Hollow, ambulance lights strobed, sirens wailing thin through the wind. Medics rushed, radios crackled, someone called Nora's name, breaking with relief. Dylan sat on the ground arm, wrapped in a makeshift bandage, blood still seeping, shirt soaked through. His eyes never left the steel door, a final wall between him and Riggs. Beside him, Nora was bundled in a blanket, gripping the battered flashlight. She didn't cry loud now. Her face, pale eyes, swollen lips, trembling. She whispered so soft it barely stirred the air, Riggs. Dylan bowed his head. Hope still burned, but beneath it spread numbness. His last sight of Riggs hauling Nora toward the light before the iron jaws fell. Then, shouts from behind. "Dylan, watch out!" The earth trembled. Machinery groaned below. The sealed door rattled. Grass quivered. Everyone froze, eyes wide in amaze. A slit of light glowed at the base. Then, 3 knocks. Short, sure. Dylan surged forward, dropped to his knees at the threshold. "Riggs?" No answer, just dust spilling out. Then a shadow, a paw clawing free. Then another, and at last the great body heaving through the gap. Caked in dirt, hind legs, limping, blood streaking from his side. Riggs. Exhausted. Broken. But alive. His eyes still burned fixed on Dylan and the girl. No growl, no cry. Only the quiet, steady return of a warrior. Riggs Dylan fell beside him, cradling the broad head in his hands. The shepherd pressed his muzzle to Dylan's palm, then turned toward Nora. She leapt blanket, falling arms wrapping his bloodied neck, burying her face in his fur. He didn't leave me." Her sobs burst sharp and loud at last, shattering the silence like a storm breaking after endless rain. Riggs didn't move much. He only rested head leaning against Dylan's chest, eyes heavy, but open. Watching. Always watching. Toward the light. Toward the child who still lived. "You came back?" Dylan whispered, voice breaking. Riggs whined low. An answer. A promise. "I'm still here." In the ambulance, Riggs lay on his own stretcher, Dylan and Nora beside him. The overhead lights flickered across his dark eyes. The vet worked quickly, hands firm, but Riggs stayed calm still. His gaze never wavered from Nora, who had fallen asleep at last, with one small hand resting on his back. Outside, the Elm Hollow estate was sealed off completely. Down in the basement, every trace left behind would become a vital piece of evidence in the crackdown. But for Riggs, everything that mattered had already been brought out. A small life, a flicker of hope, and a promise kept in silence. Dylan leaned against the side of the ambulance, his hand resting on Riggs's head. "You did it. Rest now." Riggs closed his eyes, for the first time in days. But his breathing stayed steady, and somewhere in the turning wash of red lights against the windows, it felt like a quiet farewell whispered through. The special care ward for service animals was on the 2nd floor of the city's veterinary center. Soft daylight filtered through the old cream-painted windows, laying a long pale stripe across the silver-gray tiles. The room was hushed, only the gentle rhythm of the heart monitor pulsing like the patient beat of life itself. Riggs lay motionless on a padded cot, a hind leg braced, fur shaved along his back for treatment. His breathing was even, chest rising faintly. An IV fed into his vein. Green lights blinked with each measured beat. Dylan sat slumped in the corner chair, eyes sunken. Jacket unchanged since that night. He hadn't left in 2 days. His hand rested lightly against Riggs's shoulder, stroking slowly, wordlessly. The door opened. Nora appeared, quiet as a breeze, her hair tied back, clean clothes on a small bag in her arms. The nurse moved to speak, but Dylan raised a hand gently, let her go alone. Step by step, Nora approached the cot. She said nothing. She didn't cry. She sat by the bedside, set her bag down, and placed a trembling hand against the shepherd's shoulder. Just a touch, but certain. Dylan rose, retreating to the far corner, leaving the space to them alone, one who had been trapped in silence, and one who had walked into the dark to pull her free. Nora gazed at Riggs. Her dark eyes shimmered under the morning glow. She bent close to his ear, listening to the breath. A minute. 2. Riggs did not stir. But when she placed her second hand on his neck, his chest shifted, deeper, stronger. Not chance. Because she was here. From her bag, she drew a folded sheet of paper. She opened it. A pencil sketch, a girl beside a great dog behind them, a split-iron gate with light streaming through the crack. She set it gently on the cot. Then she raised her hand. Her fingers moved. Motions of sign language taught by the therapist. Left hand brushed, the chin lowered to her chest. Thank you. Riggs opened his eyes, slowly, but clear. Light glimmered in them. He looked at Nora, and for the first time lifted his head just enough to touch her arm. Nora trembled, and then something surged inside her, breaking the silence. Her lips pressed once as if to hold it back. But she looked straight into Riggs' eyes, the eyes that had crossed fire and iron. A fragile sound broke free, like a thread snapping. Riggs. Dylan froze. Out in the hallway, the nurse turned thinking someone had called. But it was only Nora. A single word. Rough, incomplete. Yet it was the first sound she had spoken in 3 years. Not a parent's name, not mom or dad, but Riggs. The dog did not bark. He only closed his eyes again, as if to answer with gratitude and peace. That afternoon, the ward seemed lighter. Nurses came to change dressings. Doctors checked the heart monitor. Dylan left briefly to report to headquarters. But Nora stayed. She drew another picture, this time of the hospital, with Windows Sunlight herself raising a hand in the thank you sign. Beside her, Riggs still bandaged but ears perked as though listening. She taped it on the wall above Riggs's bed, right next to the monitor. Solder. Everyone who entered saw it. Everyone who passed by slowed. Late at night, Dylan returned. Nora had fallen asleep, head resting against Riggs's leg. And Riggs, as always, kept one eye open, watchful. Dylan placed a blanket over her shoulders, then brushed Riggs's back. Sleep, partner. You've done enough. The Ravenbrook security headquarters, once just a gray building for dusty files and dull meetings, had become the nerve center of the largest crackdown in a decade. Dylan stood before a wall-sized data board. Red threads stretched from Elm Hollow across the digital map, branching like a web, spanning nearby states, weaving through charity networks, reaching into powerful names in education and healthcare. The files were heavy, overflowing. The name Beaumont surfaced again and again. At the core, like the tumor grown silent for years. Dylan clenched his fists. He knew Riggs's instincts had never been wrong. 2 weeks after the Elm Hollow rescue, during a joint briefing with Interpol and international security units, Dylan's case was confirmed. Beaumont had financed at least 4 orphan institutions in 3 countries. Behind each one lay warehouses, transfer stations, temporary shelters, euphemisms for cages where children were held before transactions. Beaumont was arrested at dawn on Wednesday, dragged from his private estate a state away, still in a gray silk robe, pale-faced as the cameras flashed. Photos spread across the world within hours. Yet the image people lingered on wasn't Beaumont at all. It was the poster behind him at Ravenbrook HQ. Riggs, lying beside Nora, the red toy flashlight glowing behind them. Beneath bold letters read, Operation Red Signal. When even the smallest light is enough to lead us out of the dark. Riggs became the symbol, not for attack, but for presence. For the warmth that saved a life. For the calm eyes that walked into despair and stayed until it broke. For the dog who knelt beside fear and did not leave. Nora herself, key survivor of the case, had chosen the name. She wrote Red Signal in red ink and slid it onto Dylan's desk during one visit with her guardian. When asked why, she simply touched her chest, then Riggs's neck. Because he saw when everyone else closed their eyes. Operation Red Signal expanded swiftly. More than 10 countries joined. Childcare institutions were audited. Laundering fronts were seized. Hundreds of children were found. pulled from remote corners, from ports, from basements, beneath safe places. Riggs appeared on the cover of a major newspaper's monthly special. The photo showed him sitting upright, ears alert, yet his gaze gentle. Behind him, Nora's drawing a red flashlight beam, cutting into endless darkness. At the international press conference, the campaign's commander-in-chief said, "We used to think we needed more guns, more sanctions." But it was a dog, whose loyalty could never be taught, who showed us that sometimes, to find the truth, all we must do is stand beside pain long enough. As for Dylan, he chose not to leave Ravenbrook. He turned down the offer of a federal transfer, though superiors hailed him as a key figure in breaking the trafficking network. He stayed, because Riggs was here, and because children still needed someone to listen. A new room opened at Ravenbrook named The Red Corner, inspired by Nora's flashlight. It became a place where survivors could come to play draw or simply sit with Riggs. The dog, now healed slower in step, but still willing to lie still for hours, listened to the breath of children struggling to step out of silence. Riggs needed no commands, no badge, only to be present, just as before, just as that night, just as when the last narrow beam of light flickered. One gray morning drizzle swept across Ravenbrook's rooftops. Streets gleamed, wet fallen leaves clung to patrol car windows, like faint reminders of another season. Dylan parked in front of a red brick house at the end of Stillwater Street. The file listed it as Nora's parents' current residence. He held the folder in his hand, pausing before knocking. Inside was an old photo of Nora, barely 4, her eyes bright, her smile tilted, standing between 2 adults. Beneath it were her parents' signatures, and a chilling note from local welfare refusal to reclaim minor due to unsuitable family conditions. Dylan knocked. A man opened, gaunt, unshaven eyes dull with irritation, as if every moment was an inconvenience. Behind him, a woman lingered in the doorway, clutching a paper coffee cup. "Who are you looking for?" the man rasped. "I'm Officer Dylan Ward, in charge of the Elm Hollow rescue. I came to talk about Nora." A flicker of hesitation. The man's gaze dropped. "What's left that concerns us? She's your daughter." The woman slowly turned away. The man shrugged. "We thought she'd been taken long ago." Anger surged in Dylan's chest. He set the folder down firmly on the nearby table. "She survived. She's still in Ravenbrook. I want to know if you intend to bring her home." The man smirked faintly. "Honestly, she's better off there. Can't you see? She's on the news, gets cared for, people pay attention. Here, there's nothing. Besides, we had an arrangement with Mr. Beaumont." The last words froze Dylan. His voice hardened. "He bought your silence. We just took the stipend. In return, we didn't ask questions. Nora was too little then." Dylan rose to his full height, eyes locked on the man. "She's not a burden. She's a victim." The man shrugged again, as though the matter was closed. Dylan turned and left, without farewell. That afternoon, back at the ward, Dylan found Nora by the window sketchbook on her lap. Riggs lay with his head across her legs, as always. She had finished a drawing, this time no fire, no basement, no red light. Only 3 figures sitting together, a girl, a man, in a police cap, and a bandaged dog. Behind them, a small house with a porch. Dylan sat beside her. "I went to see your family, Nora." She didn't react right away. Only after a pause did she set her pencil down and look up. "They aren't ready." Maybe they never were. His voice was soft. Nora didn't cry. She only gazed out the window where the evening sun poured a warm gold over the hospital yard. Dylan squeezed her hand gently. "I wasn't ready for Riggs either. I thought I was only temporary. But one day I realized he never thought so." Riggs lifted his head, dark brown eyes fixed on Dylan. "So if you want, I can be your family." For the first time, Nora blinked quickly, not from dust, but to hold back tears. She turned to Riggs, laid a hand on his head. The shepherd gave a small, low whine, like a silent nod. Then Nora turned back, looked at Dylan, lips pressed tight, and nodded. Once. But enough. The following week, the adoption papers were finalized. Dylan became Nora's legal guardian. She moved into his wooden house at the town's edge. Once a place of two silences, a grieving officer, and a wordless dog. Now there was a new voice humming softly in the mornings. A pair of small shoes scattered on the porch steps. And a new picture taped to the fridge, 3 silhouettes sitting side by side facing the rising sun. Morning in Ravenbrook was gentler than anywhere else. Mist brushed the porch rails and the faded fences, trailing along the stone path toward the special school at the town's edge. There was no sun, but no gloom either. A half-light that felt exactly like Nora's mood that morning, wavering between fear and eagerness. She stood before the mirror, straightening the collar of her white shirt. A pale purple backpack, brand new, waited by the door. Embroidered on its flap was a hand-stitched image, a dog with a red scarf at its neck, ears, sharp eyes forward. Riggs. He lay on the porch, chin on his paws, the shaved scar along his side still visible, the wound healing slowly. The vet had said he'd never run fast again, might ache when the weather turned. But when Nora stepped outside, he rose slowly, heavily but surely, and walked to her. Every step weighed, but he still walked. Dylan opened the car door. "Ready?" he asked. Half to reassure her, half to convince himself that life was truly beginning again. Nora didn't speak. She nodded lightly. She climbed in hand on the strap of her backpack, and Riggs, though Dylan had insisted on the back seat, jumped up front right at her feet. He still wanted to be close. The special school was a small building with a playground out back and wide glass halls lined in wood. Here children were not forced to speak. No one demanded their stories. Everything began with only one promise: safety. Dylan stopped the car at the school gate. Other children were walking hand in hand toward class, one with a hoodie pulled low, another clutching a worn-out stuffed animal. Nora only watched from behind the glass. "I can walk with you if you want," Dylan said, his voice soft as wind brushing leaves. Nora shook her head. She glanced down at Riggs, waiting with patient eyes. Then slowly, she opened the door. Her first step on the ground tightened her grip on the backpack strap. Riggs jumped out after her, standing right by her side, his body tilted slightly. His new habit after the injury. Dylan stepped out too, not to follow, only to watch. Nora walked slowly toward the gate. Riggs walked beside her. Each step was a quiet dot in a line of movement. Other children turned their heads, some surprised, some smiling faintly. A blonde teacher crouched down, waved at Nora. Her glance dropping quickly to Riggs. No one stopped them. No one asked why the dog was there. Because here, every presence was welcome, so long as it carried something true. In the classroom, Nora chose the last desk by the window. Riggs curled up at her side, head resting on her small legs. The teacher began her lesson, drawing the first signs of the day on the board. Nora watched intently, then silently copied. No one spoke. Yet the room seemed to grow brighter, lit by something unseen. From the corner of the yard, the late morning sun slipped through tree branches, casting a thin stripe across the floor. Riggs turned his head, eyes fixed on a flock of sparrows, swooping down, then rising again. He didn't bark, didn't chase. He only lay there, breathing slow, as if all the world's peace could be held in that single moment when Nora raised her hand to sign a new word. By afternoon, Dylan was waiting outside. When the classroom doors opened, Nora stepped out, her face lighter. She didn't smile, but her eyes carried less weight. She walked toward the car, Riggs trailing behind. Though his leg ached now, he let no one notice. On the drive back, Dylan asked, "How was today?" Nora opened her little notebook and quickly drew 3 circles, large, medium, and small, pressed close together. "What's this?" Dylan asked. She smiled faintly, then touched each circle. "Me, Riggs, teacher," then added a smaller one beside it. "The class." Dylan smiled. "So we're widening the circle." Riggs laid his head in Nora's lap. His eyes closed, but his breathing stayed steady warm. On a breezy late spring afternoon, the Windermere Center for Child Recovery opened its yard. A place once a run-down clinic, now painted in soft cream with grass stretching to a quiet lake. Here were children with silences of every kind, one found in a smuggler's truck, one pulled from a border river, one rescued from places darker than memory. And Nora. Today was her first time telling her story, not with words, but with drawings cast on a white screen and with her own hands. Before her, 20 children sat in a circle on the grass. Some hugged stuffed toys, some wore noise-canceling headphones, some still flinched at every sound. But when Nora stepped up, they all stilled. In her hand was the old red flashlight, the one found with her deep in Elm Hollow's basement the night Riggs pulled her through the closing steel door. Its light blinked, same rhythm, same red, but no longer a warning, now a memory. She began to draw. A dark room, small windows, scribbled lines for muffled cries. Then, a red dot of light, and the shape of a dog breaking through. Next, she drew herself, small, curled up, and the dog lying down beside her. The children held their breath. The youngest reached out, touching Nora's hand. "That was the dog who saved you?" Nora nodded. She raised the flashlight high, the red beam glowing in her palm, then placed it down on the grass, aimed toward the familiar shape resting under a tree. Riggs. He lay stretched out, eyes half shut, wind stirring the fur around his collar. A new band rested there, woven gray fabric with a small metal tag engraved, "Riggs," a signal of life in the dark. From the edge of the yard, Dylan leaned against the glass door, watching. The air carried the scent of cut grass, the sound of a girl's first laugh after trauma. Riggs no longer ran as before. His hind leg left a crooked mark when he rose. But no one cared. He was still here, and that was never small. Dylan walked closer, crouched by Nora, voice gentle. "You told it, Nora?" She turned, smiling faintly, sunlight caught in her eyes. She took his hand, then pointed at Riggs. "And him? When will he tell his story?" Dylan ruffled her hair. "Riggs tells it every day, just by staying." After the session, children rushed to the back lawn. Some drew spirals of light on the brick wall with chalk. Some put on headphones, their faces calm for the first time. Nora stayed on the steps beside Riggs. She twisted the flashlight, making its red beam blink in rhythm with her imagined heartbeat. A boy walked over, looking at Riggs. "Is he yours?" Nora shook her head, then nodded. "He doesn't belong to anyone, but he's always with the one who needs him." The boy was quiet a long moment, then sat down, leaning gently against Riggs' back. The shepherd didn't move. He only opened his eyes, gazing toward the trees where sunlight brushed the season's first green buds. That evening, when the others had gone inside, Dylan and Nora walked Riggs along the lake. Water rippled under the breeze, reflecting lights from the center's roof. Small fish leapt like greetings. "Do you think you're ready to tell it to more people?" Dylan asked quietly. Nora didn't answer at once. She bent down, shining the flashlight on the ground. The red glow slid over grass, then stopped at Riggs' paws. She lifted her hands, signing, "I don't tell it alone." Dylan looked down at the dog walking beside them. No, because a signal of life never comes from just one side. At the far end of the hall, a small room was being rebuilt to hold a wooden statue of Riggs carved from reclaimed timber. At its base, a bronze plate would read, "To be present," enough to change a life. The story did not end in the basement, nor in the red flashlight. It continues, in every child learning to speak again, in each careful step of Riggs, and in every silent gaze of those who never spoke, yet always listened. Some stories, even when passing quietly, echo long after, like the way Riggs walked with Dylan, then with Nora, through the shadows of fear, pain, and forgetting. No words, no spotlight, just a German shepherd's steady eyes, his unshaken loyalty, becoming a symbol of survival and of trust rekindled in hearts once frozen. It reminds us of the power of presence, that sometimes all it takes is a being willing to walk slowly beside us, warming with a quiet breath to save a life. The German shepherd, with his guarding instinct, his sharp mind, his near-absolute loyalty, is more than a companion. He is a keeper of fragile rhythms. Through Riggs we learn love need not be loud. And sometimes the strongest light begins as a small red blink in the dark. Cherish animals with respect and with listening. Live gently, like Riggs lying beside a child, watching the one he trusts crossing boundaries thought impossible, just to bring back something simple, the survival of kindness.